if you want to be in this field for a long time, then you need to start figuring out some healthier ways to create balance in your life. And I think that balance is relative to you and what your career or like what sports you work with, obviously, and how far you want to take your career.
Tessa Grossman, director of VCU Women's Basketball Performance, back for a 2.0, back at it. Welcome. Thanks for joining. How are you doing today? And tell me some good that's going on in your life.
I am doing good. Thank you for having me back on. Something good. Let's see. I just bought my ticket home for Christmas.
Let's
So
go.
obviously I'm from San Diego, so getting to go home for Christmas is always a treat.
How long is that flight?
If it's direct, you can get it for like 5-ish hours,
Oh
but
my gosh.
it's really hard to get direct. So usually it's like an hour, hour and a half, and then like another 4-hour flight. It's a long day of travel, but it's worth it to see the family and to get to go home for a couple days.
Are you a plane sleeper? Are you a reader? What's your go-to?
I try to sleep. I'm either a sleeper or Netflix shows. I'll have like a whole season downloaded and I'll just like whip it out.
I just rotate between like napping and then like, oh man, I should probably read, and then 3 pages, and then I'm out again, and then it just like repeats that cycle. Then I read like 9.5 pages over the course of a flight. Um, so Tessa's joining for a 2.0. So episode 144 is when she was on originally. So if you guys want to check that out, that was a little bit more general questions, but I'm here to set the stage to highlight Tessa, her journey, her some of her basketball specific kind of X's and O's, and kind of just dive into things a little bit more specific. So she spent 3 years at Middle Tennessee State, has had stints and internships with the Jets, Falcons, Bengals, and Rams. Spent time at Illinois State as well. And first, to kind of kick this off, do you have any updates to the craziest story? And do you remember what your craziest story was from your first episode?
I think my craziest story was about being in a private jet with Sean McVay.
Yeah, sharing a plane with Sean McVay.
To this day, that's still like probably the top craziest thing that I've gotten to experience, especially because I was 20. Like, where was I? How did that happen? I would say just the general training camp has probably that I did with the Jets. So I was a training camp intern for them in 2023. So that was like
This past summer, no, 2 summers ago.
2 summers ago. They had just got Rodgers pre-injury. So like the hype was high. Everyone was just like stoked on life. And the expectations were just like limitless for that year for them. So that six I was there for the whole 6 weeks. So they did the Hall of Fame game that year, and I got to travel for all the games. So like just getting to be at the Hall of Fame game, like what a cool experience. Um, I remember when we got on the plane the first time, it was a double-decker plane,
A
and the
double
guy,
decker, but holy crap.
like I've
Was there
never
like jets on the side? Or like was
I
it
don't even remember. Like, I think I was like so nervous about like tripping up the stairs or just like looking dumb. It's like the little intern's first travel trip. Like,
yeah, just act planted for the camera, just like
yeah, it's like just don't look dumb. Don't be the person who holds the line. Like, find a seat, sit down. Like, look like you've been here before, even though like they're handing out all these snacks and all this stuff.
it's like
Uh,
free food, yes.
right. Don't look like the intern who's not making enough money and needs all the free food they can get. Um, but it was a double-decker plane, and I just like vividly remember one of the guys being like, "This is the Rodgers effect. Like, this is what happens when you have Aaron Rodgers on your team. You get double-decker planes."
Oh my
But
gosh.
that whole training camp was just like really cool. Like I said, we got to do joint practices with the Carolina Panthers. Oh, and it was on HBO. So like you always saw Hard Knocks around the building.
Mhm.
Like that was so sick to be at a training camp that was also on Hard Knocks. Like we're watching the episodes, and then I'm going into work the next day, and like everyone's talking about like what happened versus like what like we saw happening in the building. So
Did you see yourself in the background of any of the episodes?
yes, you can, and it's
Whoa.
you because like if you've seen me coach, I always have some sort of like colored scrunchie in my hair. And so like one of the episodes I had like a pink scrunchie in, and you can like definitely see my pink scrunchie just like bopping around in the warm-up lines during a practice. But that's it. That was like the extent of my TV time.
So correlation or causation that your coolest stories involve super legit planes.
I don't know, man. I just feel like, the NFL has access to stuff that you just don't have access to on a regular basis. And maybe like pro sports in general just has access to stuff that you don't have on a general basis. Because like, when would you ever be on a double-decker plane in college athletics? At
Oh,
least
for sure.
I've been.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast, my fantasy football podcast I have too, and and they were talking about someone's contract or an organization or how expensive a stadium was. I think it was the Dallas Stadium and how it was built for, 1 billion or 2 billion or whatever. And then it's like, oh yeah, back 9 years ago when that was actually a lot of money. And it's like that's kind of true, when Shohei Ohtani's making like 750 million. Like that's how you reference his contract is relative to a billion. So I feel like the regular person doesn't understand or fathom literally how much money there is.
So much money. Like the way things just like appear, especially like at the pro level. It's like, yeah, we need money for this, and it's just like that. We're like, in college, especially like if you work at like a lower level or like a mid-major or like any sort of D2 and below, like you're just like begging, like, please, can we just get this like 5K for this? Please, we'll make it last for 2 years, like we promise.
Oh, for sure. It was so I played, small D2 and we got every year a pair of cleats, three hats, and two shirts, and then we got one pair of shorts for 4 years, and then we had to buy everything else. And fortunate enough to where I could afford that stuff. But going to TCU Beach, they got no sympathy from me when they were complaining about their gear and all this stuff. I was like, you guys don't know how hard some people have it. And like that was like a good non-major sport in the Big 12. Like I can't even imagine what like Power Five, like a good Power Five football, and then above that is like the NFL and everything. But um anyways, so cool intro. Glad we had a little update. When you come on for a 3.0, I expect another plane story.
Oh God.
So how many years, including Illinois State, has it been coaching for you now?
So I did 1 year at Illinois State and I did 3 at Middle Tennessee. This is the start of my 5th year then at VCU.
Fit is an online programming software that helps you train more athletes in less time with greater individualization. For in person or remote training, Fit does so with a streamlined programming process, decision making trees to help you integrate data into your programming, as well as better communication with all pieces of a high performance model involved to break down silos. Learn more at fit.io, that's fytt.io, and tell them that Matt Tometz sent you. Fantastic. So, first question brought to you by 1080 Motion. Make speed happen. They have awesome products, great people over there. I've been using their products for 4+ years now. Can't speak high enough of them. So, the first question, now that you've had a chance to kind of settle in to your
Mhm.
career, and I equate like the first year is just like blur doesn't count. Second year, you're like, okay, like I'm doing the things, but like I don't really know why. And I feel like three is when you really start to make your own choices and you get to understand things a little bit deeper. So now that you're a 4+ and a podcast I just released about like the secret sauce of how we all do basically very similar things. Like you can't reinvent the wheel just cause. But what would you say are 1 to 3 kind of staples in your program looking back of all of the things you've tried with all the different sports, all the different settings, the few things that you double down on, that you stick to if someone were to watch your session, they'd be able to point out like, oh, yep, that's a classic for her. That's her go-to. So, as simple or complex as they may be, what are some staples in your programs, kind of looking back over the last few years?
I feel like you get the classics, right? Like we're gonna sprint, we're gonna jump, all that type of stuff. I will always have some sort of crawl or carry in my program. And then I always have some sort of med ball variation. I feel like that comes from like the softball days. And I've just realized how much non-rotational sport athletes don't rotate in a powerful way. So like that's a staple for sure. Um, I would say something that is in my program, not year round, but especially working with basketball for the last 4 out of the 5 years, is contact prep. I started doing it at middle, and I kind of developed my own little progression based off of what I had learned from other people and then just like what I saw from basketball. And so I would say August and September, it kind of depends on the team and like what we need and where we're at. But I will always run some sort of like 4 to 8 week contact prep progression. Some of it happens in the weight room, some of it happens, on the court. But that's a staple for me. And it was fun this year to do it with like a brand new team who had like never seen my progression before.
How
Um,
would you describe or what is contact prep for someone who's not familiar?
so contact prep for me, I look at it 2 ways. One, it's just a way to reintroduce contact between athletes. If you play a sport where you do have a high contact rate, especially if they aren't like getting that type of accumulation of contact like over the summertime, depending on like how your team practices or doesn't practice. And it's like a safe, controlled way to start to build that volume back up so it's not so much of a shock to the body. And then also I've found that a lot of times these athletes are going through contact at high speeds and have never actually like stopped to think about how their body works or how physics works. So it gives them like a controlled way to start to learn like, oh, this type of angle kind of creates this. This is how I can brace. Like this is how I get leverage. Like two of the big ones I do is like a shoulder to shoulder, so like a defensive stance, and then we'll do like a bear crawl, and we'll basically start in working in control. So it's like, hey, we're both driving into each other even. Like the goal was not to win; it's just to learn how to brace, how to create contact, how to create tension quickly. Then we'll go to like, okay, now I want you to try to drive them and push them. And then the last one is just like one rep for a winner. Like whatever you have to do, you got to get your body across this line before they get across the line. And so it just allows them to like, okay, learn how to control my body, learn how to create leverage, and then let's just amp it up more and then put it in a competitive pattern like you would see it in a game.
That was my next question. I guess you read my mind of how to like structure and progress that over time. Um, of course, there's the volume component, but probably more importantly is the intensity component. And just changing the objective of the drill, probably just upping that every what 2, 3 weeks, and then you get 3, 4 progressions, so that makes sense to me. And this was going to be a question that I took it out because I thought it was simple, but I definitely want to ask it now. Coaches, this podcast is sponsored by Samson Equipment. They've been providing elite strength training equipment and professional weight room solutions since 1976. If you value quality products, great customer service, and a company with integrity, then make Samson Equipment your go-to. Visit them at samsonequipment.com, that's SAMSON Equipment, and let them know that Matt Tometz sent you. ISOFIT is not just pioneering isometric strength training, but they are opening up a brand new world of possibilities with health and performance benefits through isometric training and their own groundbreaking product. With patented force matching technology, they're reshaping the boundaries of functional health and human performance. Discover the future of health, fitness, and sports performance at isofit.com. That's ISOPHIT.com, and tell them that Matt Tillman sent you. So having spent time in two or both gendered sports, basically like football, and then now exclusively women's basketball, and me having spent time working with both genders at TC Boost, and then I had a women's team at Northwestern as well. How do you think the relative maxes, for like back squat or bench? So like let's use 1.7 for the back squat for guys, 1.3 or 4 for the bench. How do those compare for women? Or like what are your standards for strong enough for women's teams, if that makes sense? Like how would that relative 1.7, 1.4, whatever compare guy to girl in your opinion? Are they the same or is it a little lower?
Honestly, like I don't pay attention for my women. Um,
Do they ever get strong enough in your opinion? Or is like I had freshmen squatting 450 plus and 500 pounds. So like they are for sure strong enough. Like if you have a fifth year, sixth year, like are they always going to be trying to increase their max? Or kind of how do you view max strength development? And is there a strong enough for women? Or is there just so much sport and going on like maybe not that that's not attainable, but like you should just always be trying to get stronger for that gender?
I feel like with basketball, it's really hard to be like, these are the strength or like relative strength that we're looking for because they play year round. And like, I actually just had this discussion with someone earlier today. Like, we are talking about off seasons
Destiny.
and it's like football, like the off season is it's such a clear cut like progression, right? It's like, I know that we are not playing football for these 2 months and then I can work and we can build max strength and whatever. And nothing is going to like undermine what we're doing. And I'm going to get a true max and then we're going to go from there. But like from basketball, like your season ends, you're off for 2 weeks, you're back to training, you're already doing individuals again. Then
Mm.
they go home for May, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Once again, they're back. We started doing small group practices and team practices pretty quickly. So it's like we never stopped practicing as a team. And so like you're programming around practices still, even in off season to some degree. And like, yeah, like sounds bad, like you care a little bit less, right? Because it's off season. And like that also comes down to you having that conversation with your coach and them understanding like what where priorities need to be. And but like you never don't have basketball in your year.
Yeah.
So I found that like doing true max days, like, and also like because they always have basketball in their year, like there's always some sort of level of injuries or things bothering kids. And then you get into the topic of, okay, well, now look at basketball players' bodies. And I think this is true for men's and women's. Like you have such weird, you can have such like interesting body types in basketball, that it's like, okay, well, I'm not gonna put a barbell on her for whatever A, B, C, D, and E. So it's like, am I gonna max out a dumbbell RFE? Like maybe that's fine, but like
Yeah.
there's just like so many things and caveats I feel like when you're working with basketball. So like for me personally, like I think it's like you kind of see it and you know it. For example, like I had our one of our starting guards, she front squatted 225 this summer.
That's strong enough for sure.
Yeah, like that's strong enough. Like I don't, if you put me under 225 right now, like I could do it, but it won't look as good as hers. Or, like our 6 year post, they did a split squat trap bar at like 280. I'm like, yeah, you're strong enough. You can lift that in a
Yeah.
split squat stance. Like you're good. You're one of our other guards, like she benched 135 for 5 reps. I'm like, that's plenty strong enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's more like you see things like that. I think like kind of going back to your original question, like I'm a big fan of if you feel good and you communicate that with me, like I'll let it ride. Like let's go. Let's see what you got in the tank. Because I think like anyone who's been in, sports performance long enough, like you don't feel your best all the time. In fact, most of the
Yeah.
time you don't. So if you have a day and we're in the weight room, especially if it's off season, and I think I got this concept honestly more from working football at Middle Tennessee, was like yeah, you can have like a max out day, but what if those kids don't feel good on that max out day? So I try to take advantage of that in off season. Like if we have like the day that that girl hit 135 for 5 was not a max out day, but she felt great that day. And I trusted her and I was watching and, I spotted her and we let it ride. But then that's on you also as a sports performance coach to make sure that you're being smart with your athletes and you're not putting them in a position where it's like we're maxing out for stupid reasons. So I know I kind of like went on I took a left turn, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think like I don't really think of it as like, okay, I'm gonna have a true max out day.
So I agree. I'm also not a one rep max guy. I think there's too many proxies of one rep max strength. Like we had gym awares at Northwestern, so that's just a super simple load velocity profile when the velocity's assuming point 0.3 is like a max. Or you could do like a rep out basically, or say, hey, stop at one in the tank and trust that it's like one in the tank. And then, if they do three with one in the tank, then that's like a 4 rep max. And then you turn that into a one. So there's other ways to do it. So I guess, is there anything that you're shooting for, right? Or when would an athlete move from, for example, like if I have a baseball guy and we're trying to, RFS body weight for 5. Well, what if they can do that, then they're going to get into, more single leg power work. So like when would someone make that jump from like the max strength bucket into whatever's next for a female athlete? If there's a number to that, or it's more just feel.
Um, I feel like it's not necessarily like a jump. I think it's more of like a form and technique thing for the way that I look at it. Because like I think a lot of women's basketball players that you get, especially like some of the international girls, have never really lifted before, right? Like the training age is very young. So you're starting with a goblet squat, and it's like, okay, well, um, what what does that technique look like off the bat? And then once you see that they can handle, whatever you feel is proficient. And I feel like a lot of times it is what is the average of the team, right? Like, okay, most of the team, this team seems to be able to handle whatever, 75 plus for 5 reps, 10 reps. Okay, she can do that. She can maintain good form. I'm ready to move her on to front squat. And so and even that, like now I don't even think that like you get taught like, oh, goblet squat, front squat. Like I don't even think that has to be the progression. That's like a whole nother conversation. Um, but also like the way that I program is like it's never just like, oh, we're just doing max strength. And then once you've graduated from max strength, like you can't do true block in basketball. Like that's just
Mm,
not gonna work
yeah.
at all. You're I use the basis of block periodization in off season, right? Like, yeah, we're gonna start with some accumulation again. We're gonna do some higher volume stuff. We'll move into some strength and then into max strength. But the reality is like you don't even have long enough to stick into these like true blocks. So it's just like, yeah, that's more just like my focus. And then I use like a vertical integration. So it's like, yeah, like max strength is the emphasis for this block. And then next block will move to like an emphasis of like powers, whatever strength, speed, whatever you decide to go into next. But then once the second I get into season, it's more of like I have a day where we're gonna hit like our main strength movement, our main power movement, and then I'll have another day that's more like range of motion, recovery, unilateral, like that's kind of more how I split up my programming. So it's not necessarily like I'm like, oh, you've checked this strength box, so now I can push you into this, whatever strength speed box. It's more like we're working on these qualities year round, and then it's depending on what time of the year it is, your play time, what year you are, that kind of dictates like what can I push. Like for
Mm.
example, when I was at Middle Tennessee, I really had five girls who our starters really just dominated our playtime. All of our starters played over 1,000 minutes last year, and they all averaged 35 plus minutes per game. That's
Jeez.
insane. It's crazy. So like what was on the other side of that was I had a large chunk of girls who, they're only lifting twice a week for 30, 40 minutes. It's like, okay, well, they need to get better. So I started to become more aggressive with their training, and we worked some volume back in and more max strength stuff that I wouldn't typically put on someone in season to that capacity. But based off of the context of the situation, like we were able to push those qualities more, where like my starters worked on different qualities at different volumes.
Mm. Yeah, I guess the context of, hoopers hoop just all year. Like they're probably not off of a court for more than a few days at a time. Versus baseball, you have the whole fall, you have December, January, half of February, and then like the summer, depending on what they do. So I guess that there's some context to that. But um, yeah, just interesting to get your take now working exclusively with female athletes. But so that was brought to you by 1080 Motion. Again, here to make speed happen. Big fan of those guys as people, and then also the product itself. So next. Um, being in the basketball world itself, what is something that you think the basketball world does well that the rest of the Olympic world can learn from? Because, football is just its own city, its own just different language and everything. And then one thing that you think the basketball world in general for performance can learn from others or incorporate a few things to become a little bit better. So like for example, like baseball, their days are just so inefficient. Like first stretch was 2 hours and 35 minutes before first pitch because we warm up and then we throw and then we do BP and then they warm up, throw BP, and then basically you just switch who has the field for like two or three different things for not only just that day, but like if you're playing Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's the same thing every single day, you know? Um, but something I think that they do well is like the fall. Of course, you have the fall World Series, but that's only like, let's say just like a week of practice where baseball is more of a focus. So people know that just the fall is for development, So I think that they have a good job, at least with an academic calendar, of like separating training for performance and training for sport. So what's one thing that you think the basketball world does well, and one thing that you think they can kind of pick up the slack a little bit, in your humble opinion?
I think that from like a sports performance viewpoint, basketball does individualization very well. I think that they're very open-minded to the idea that, especially lately, I feel like within the last couple of years, I feel like the basketball S&C side has become very open-minded to that like training doesn't have to look like the traditional training that we've seen. There's a lot more concepts that I feel like you see emerge on the basketball side first. You see a lot more people be like, yeah, we don't touch a barbell with this, or we don't do this, whatever. And it's like, oh, I thought that was like a part of everyone's programming and you guys are winning a bunch of games. So like clearly
Doing
there's,
something right.
yeah, clearly, the way that we thought this had to go is not that. And then on the individualization level, I think that like basketball, because especially if you're like, in my situation where it's like you have one team of 15 kids, like you can really be specific and hone in on some of these things that these kids need to work on, whether, that's someone's ankle mobility, whether someone is like a very hinge dominant athlete. I think that basketball does a very good job of that.
How big is the basketball and support staff combined?
Um, let's see. We have five coaches, including our head coach. And then we have me. I have a GA. We have our athletic trainer. He has
8,
a intern or
9.
grad assistant who's here for the semester, slash another AT. Well, it's a special scenario because he's our head, he's like the head athletic trainer and our AT. So he also has like another AT who can come in and cover for him if he needs to. So I guess you could consider. So let's just say support staff alone is 4 to 5.
Mm.
Um, and then you have two managers
Hmm.
and another a video coordinator, and then you have another two basketball GAs. You have a Dobo, you have an administrative assistant. So we're probably what, like an easy 15 deep?
Basically bigger than the roster,
Yeah.
like you're talking about how easy individualization is, and then I'm over here with 35 baseball guys plus two other sports. It's like me and the athletic trainer. I'm like,
I
oh,
know.
must be nice.
And I felt that way too. Like when I was at middle and I was working with football, and then I got like my hour a day with basketball, I was like, I don't, it's so hard. Where's the time? Like
Yeah.
it's me. I'm sharing a room with a football lift as they're finishing up. I have 3 racks. I just coached 6 hours of football. Like there's no, there's just, you don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to individualize. But here it's like we have our basketball only weight room. Like, we have a red shirt and like she's gonna come and train one-on-one, like if something happens where like we've had situations where we have girls who need to do extra conditioning and girls who need to make up a lift at the same time. Okay, great. My GA can go take the extra conditioning and I'll go take the girl to lift or vice versa. Like it's so efficient. And didn't have that luxury at all when I was at Middle Tennessee, so it was so much harder to accomplish all those things.
So basketball capitalizes on relatively a smaller roster.
100%. But I feel like that's also like we should. Like
Yeah.
if
Oh,
it's
of course. Yeah.
yeah, like if it's me and a GA for 15 kids, like
Oh
we
my gosh. Yeah.
should. I actually this is something that I think is interesting that I wasn't expecting taking this position was because I'm working with such a smaller population, I have become super hypercritical of like, am I doing enough?
Mm.
Because when I was at Middle Tennessee, it was like, okay, I am doing what I can because
Yeah.
I'm literally here for 14 hours a day and every hour is being used. But here, you have a lot more time. And so I have found myself always like double back, like, okay, am I doing enough? Are we doing enough recovery? Am we doing enough in these lifts? Should these lifts be longer, shorter? Like, are we doing enough conditioning? Like, I'm just always asking, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? And so that's like kind of its own, it's a very privileged trap, but it's a trap in its own because you're just like, okay, if I'm only serving these 15 kids, I want to make sure that I'm doing it to my
Mm.
full ability.
Fantastic. Then what is one thing that you think the basketball world can do a little bit better kind of overall in general?
I think what you alluded to already with baseball, if we could just pause basketball because they want to see quicker development, especially like on the strength and conditioning side. I mean, I feel like if you're a sports performance coach, how many times have you heard a coach say like, I just need them stronger and faster? It's like, well, if we took a little bit of time off of basketball, I'm like, even 2 weeks, if you gave me 2 weeks, or like, let's just say the April, you didn't have them touch basketballs at all, and you just let me go for 3 full weeks, and I didn't have to worry about like, what are they doing outside of this? I think that you would see a lot more progress versus like always just like trying to move the needle a little bit. So that would be but like I don't know if that's like just me because I'm the strength and conditioning coach or if that's like, how other people feel. But I feel like from a sports performance aspect, if we like they play so much basketball. If they
Yeah.
don't play basketball for 2 or 3 weeks, I feel like they'll be okay. In fact, they might actually love basketball more when they get to pick the basketball up again
Yeah.
at the end of May.
Yeah. Just understand that like when all the knobs are turned up, everything just gets diluted. So it's like, all right, yeah, we can have times when it's more basketball, times when it's more training, and like just understanding when to pick and choose, but it can't be like, full 16 hours on the court or 18, and then you have 2 hours of training, and then it's like, well, why aren't they getting strong? Definitely not biased. I definitely don't totally agree with that answer. So next, so this is, I guess, kind of similar looking back to the staples in your program, but I guess this is more of a surprise. So what are a few things that pleasantly surprised you that stuck around longer in your program, that might still be in it that you tried kind of just to see how when you're like, oh man, I actually really like how this looked. And then a few things that you were super excited about doing, kind of X's and O's wide that you're like, like maybe just the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I'm kind of bummed that like that didn't turn out how I wanted it to.
Yeah, I've actually found that it's the traditional stuff that I felt this way about.
For
Um,
which side?
for both, to be honest.
Oh,
Uh,
plot twist. All right.
okay, like one thing that I am surprised has stuck around to the capacity that it stuck around is
Hmm.
just any sort of single leg or split squat variation. Like that is always present, even sometimes over, honestly, it's becoming more and more present over like a true bilateral squat pattern for me. And like a lot of that too, I think is due to the population that I work with. Like I think if I was programming for football, that would be a very different answer. But programming for the population that I do program for, it's just something like bilateral squatting is just not always worth it. Like it's just not. And like I feel like it's developed. Like at first I was like, okay, like I fought hard at middle for front squat to like be effective. And because in my little, in my head as a new coach, I was like, okay, well, as a GA, I learned like goblet squat and then front squat and then whatever. And I only front squatted in college and I was a female athlete. And like all these like context things were like, well, this is what you're supposed to do. But then I was like, my girls hate front squat, and we never get anywhere with it because they hate having the bar on the front side. They don't want to load it. And all of my posts, who are primarily hinge dominant athletes, surprise, surprise, their long legs and short torsos, also hate front squat. And I get it because I'm the same build and I hate front squat. And so finally I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna fight this fight anymore. Like, what am I fighting this fight for? Like, they don't need to be fantastic front squatters. I
Because
need
you
them,
suffer through front squats, so they have to suffer as well.
yeah, right? The classic old strength coach,
Just
like,
all your trauma, you're like, no, you get it as well.
I suffered for 4 years in college, like you have to suffer. Um, so I think it was my second or third year. I don't remember, but some point in there, I was like, you know what? I'm done with front squat on this team. Like I'm done front squatting basketball. And we switched to a more hinge dominant squat, and we had enough safety bars where we could do that. And so we did safety bar and Hatfield throughout the year. And my girls got so much more into it. And like girls who had never even put a plate or let alone like 185 on the bar, all of a sudden, hit a PR of 315 on their Hatfield. And it's like,
I
wow,
love Hatfield. I think Hatfield's super. If you have a safety squat bar, you got to be doing Hatfield stuff.
100%. Like, I guess like to answer to I guess like come full circle on this question then, like I've been surprised at how much like safety bar and Hatfield stuff has stuck in my program. Um, and how much I've moved away from just like traditional front squat and regular back squat, especially with the basketball population, like axial loading is just that's another battle of its own. So for me, that's just like something that's not worth the squeeze. Like I'm not gonna fight this fight of front squat. It's not worth it. I don't need you to be fantastic at it. But on the other end of the spectrum, something that I didn't program when I first got into it, because I just kind of was like, whatever, was bench. I was like, okay, there's a bunch of other things we can do besides barbell bench. It's a classic lift, sure, but like most of my girls coming in can't do a full push-up. So like maybe we should start there. But this is something that when I was at middle, I remember asking the girls one day, I was like, do y'all want a bench? And they were like, honestly, yeah, like it looks fun. Like, can we try? And I was like,
You're like,
okay.
let's go, finally.
Because I'm just like, dude, I just need stuff that you want to buy into. Like, if you're gonna buy into bench, then I'm all for it. And so we did bench, and they got really into it, and they loved it. And I was like, okay, let's ride with it. And then bench stayed in our program the entire year. And that's still something like I came here and like we benched over the summer, and like I rotated out. We do different bench variations, and sometimes it's dumbbell, sometimes it's incline, sometimes it's barbell, right? But it always surprises me how into bench the basketball girls get. And it's like something that I would not typically like care about having in my program because I think, like I said, there's a bunch of different things you can do to press. But yeah, it's still in my program to this day just because the buy-in is always so great.
You must have listened to my episode I posted literally like 5 hours ago. I'm sure that your notifications are on for my YouTube, of course.
Naturally.
So not only like I talked about, so it's 5 lessons that I learned from 5 years or 4.5 years of coaching, but I already made a 4 lessons in 4 years, so I just did five. So first we talked about like the secret sauce or the staples, right? But my last point was like coaches can get out of touch because we're so used to it. And like I remember like getting kind of tired with our warm up, and I still made it a little bit different every day. But it's like I remember when I was an athlete, I did the same thing every day for 4 years. Like I just liked doing my thing. So it's like we can get, and especially at TC Boost, running the same session. And I'm sure football running the same session 3, 4 times a day, but it's still like it was someone's first day in like every session at TC Boost. So it's crazy how like we can just assume these things, and like just a simple question of like would you guys want a bench? Like, should I put it in the program and like how big of an impact it is? So I think the lesson is like you can like lean on your athletes for feedback because you're kind of here for them, you know? Just like our own biases of like, oh, I like this exercise, or they won't like this, or I didn't like how this turned out in the past. So no, that's super interesting on how like our own biases are can be wrong sometimes.
No, 100%. So I'm like, dude, like, I feel like if you work with female athletes, like, you know that building up her body strength can be something that is a huge confidence booster, or it can be a big downer, you
Yeah,
know? I mean, how many times I've seen a female athlete like attempt pull-ups or attempt push-ups, and they're just like, dude, I'm just not strong. And I'm like, no, you are strong. You're just not good at this movement yet.
yeah.
So like, I think in my head, I just like assumed, I was like, okay, but like bench is like such a meathead bro football movement, but they liked it. They wanted to be a little meathead. And I was like, all right, I'm here for it. Let's go.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, especially like pull-ups and the women's swim team. Some of them were super good, and some of them were not, like only like zero or one or two. And the ones that were good in, they checked off. I think was it 8 or 10 for the women. They got to like progress, and the ones that didn't, like they would just do eccentric until they could do one, right? And then like I was like, we can make this harder, like eccentric with a weight in between your legs and all these things. And then this one girl, she went from like one to like three over the course of like just 4 weeks. And it was like the middle of the year. And I was like, that's because the swim coach told you that like you have to get better at pull-ups because I shared everyone's numbers, you know? And it was interesting because I had this question. Someone was like networking with me and they were asking swimming stuff. And it's like being good at pull-ups won't make you fast, but it's interesting watching the swim coach be able to point at the girls at the bottom and the men too, of like, oh, and they're also slow. But if you were at the top of pull-ups, it didn't necessarily mean you were fast. So that was just interesting. And I was like, yeah, that's because you actually like tried for like 4 weeks. Now imagine if you did this for 12, like you're doing it, So I think it's ways to get easy wins, So first it can be just exercises that they like, but second, like how can you kind of show progress? I think is a key with female athletes for sure. So next, last two questions here. So having spent time at mid majors, also Power Five, even if it was just for an internship or a summer, if you know which one I'm talking about, I definitely didn't stalk your LinkedIn before this. And some NFL organizations. What are some themes of the ones that you really enjoyed being a part of, and the ones that like maybe you weren't a fan of, or they didn't do things as good? And we're not here to trash organizations. We'll keep it anonymous, but basically, what are at all the different levels, things that you like that organizations did better, and then things that were a theme that were missing from the ones you didn't enjoy as much.
Yeah, I think that from the pro side, one of the things I've enjoyed about it the most is just the expectation that you are good at your job. Like you are here because, at least from the sports performance side, like I can't speak for any other part of it, but from the sports performance side, like the expectation is that you do your job at a high level and you don't need to be micromanaged and you can handle your business. And I think like to an even bigger extent, like that is the expectation. If you are a pro athlete, the expectation is that you will handle your business because this is a business and we're paying you a lot of money to do so. And so I think that's something that is a departure from the college world. However, I do think with all the NIL money now that it's gonna the lines are starting to blur a lot more. So I think those are we'll see some more crossover there, but it really is it's a business. Like if you don't do your job, you could be cut tomorrow. And they will go find someone else who can do the job better than you. So you better handle your stuff, do what you need to do. And that's just an expectation. And I think like at the college level, you don't see that as much. And like for a reason, because these kids are still developing. Like they're 18 years old. Like I was a mess at 18. Like I was a mess at 22 when I graduated. Like so I get it.
And some people are literally there just for school and sport a second,
Honestly.
which
So
isn't wrong. It just is what it is.
yeah, 100%. That's what college is for, to like start learning how to be an adult and handle yourself. And so, but from the pro side, like I thought that was a very cool theme to get to experience because it wasn't something I had really experienced on the college level at that point in time. From the Power Five level, I think one of the coolest overall themes I've seen is just like the pride that they have to play for their school. Like getting to play for a bigger program that's well known or a coach that's well known. Like I felt like a lot of those kids were very proud that they got to wear that Power Five name on their chest and be a part of like what that program represents and all the things that go along with that program. I felt like Middle Tennessee women's basketball had that element to it too, but the coaching staff was very adamant that like we are going to carry ourselves like we are a Power Five program. And I liked that. I liked that they sent that message that like that is the expectation. Like regardless of what level we play at, like we are going to carry ourselves like such. And so from the Power Five level, I really liked that aspect of it. However, I do think I do think that at the Power Five level, you do get a very large, what's the word for it? Like a large variance of athletes. And so sometimes like, the treatment, it's tough. It's tough to handle it. You got walk-ons, it's a tough. I don't
Yeah.
know. But from the mid-major level, which is where I've spent a majority of my time, early in my career, I would say one of the toughest things about working at the mid-major is that a lot of schools want you to do the most with the least. And the issue is like I feel like I think one of the positives is you get a lot of coaches at the mid-major level who care a lot about their kids and like really invest in the teams, invest in their staffs, invest in the programs, which is awesome, right? Like if you're working at mid-major, respectfully, like you're not in that job for the money. You're in it because you really enjoy coaching, and you really want to impact these kids' lives. And so you do make it work. You do the most with the least. And so these mid-majors see that and they're like, oh, well, you're fine. You don't need more. Like you just had this great season with, enough resources, so you must be okay. And it's like, no, like look at what we did with the least. Imagine if you even gave us half or like average. Like imagine how great we could be then. And like do it for the kids. Like it's not even about us. It's like we're doing this for the kids. So like the kids have shown you that they're bought in and they're going to give you the effort regardless of how much or how little you give them. So give them some more now that they've shown that they're ready to handle more. Um, but yeah, I think that's like the toughest thing about mid-major. But I think it's like I said, it's the positive on the other side of it, right? Like I think you get some really, really great coaches at the mid-major level. And I've met some directors along the way just from networking where I'm like, you are a phenomenal person and a phenomenal director. And you're like, why aren't they at a bigger school? And it's like, no, they're at the school they're at because they just want to focus on giving back to these kids and running a great program. They don't want to deal with the politics and the money and the NIL and all that stuff. And they just want to do it because of why they got into the job in the first place.
So you build deeper trauma bonds at mid majors, is what you're saying? To
100%. 100%.
phrase a different way.
Yeah. To take my rambling and put it into a little sentence, yes.
I'll see if I can summarize all of that. So kind of pro is just first, it just is more clear because of the dollar sign evaluated and probably just the stringentness and rigor that takes to get to that level. Power Five, people are super proud of what they're doing, and you do have like legacy tradition. Like I would imagine, like Alabama football, like you put on that shirt the first day, you're just like, holy crap, like I'm here, you know. Um, but on the flip side, just a bigger spread of athletes, you know. And I'm sure now with the portal NIL, just having like new kid, like way more, like not just new freshmen, you know, like probably half the team could be transfers. And then the trauma bonding at mid majors. So an interesting kind of compare and contrast. I definitely like questions kind of like that. So thank you for sharing. And the last one, as we wrap this up, so we chat about this a little bit before. I always like teasing talking before and after podcasts, so the listener gets some FOMO. So before we recorded, but then also just in our other conversations because we're kind of friends in real life. I think I can say that.
I would say we're friends in real life.
We are. You guys heard that? It's official. We are friends in real life. Um, about like, when you first get into coaching, again, how that first year is a blur, the second year is you're kind of conscious of what's happening, but it's still a blur. Of like now, in year 4 or 5, that kind of like middle, it's like the new people that don't get respected. It's like that middle, and then it's like the old people that have been doing it, probably like 6, 7 plus. So now when you know what you do, you know what you believe in, you understand how the field works, and like now you're an adult, definitely not still in my quarter life crisis at 28, but wanting to build a life and some of the things that we talked about that kind of fill you back up because this job does require a lot. So to feel like a human, whether it's myself, like some of the things that I enjoyed the most was doing a bowling league a few summers ago. I averaged like 177, not too bad if I do say so myself. Um, Seeing my family a little bit more consistently, and then even just like making an Xbox date with my brother. And like I just know that I have something to do and like something to look forward to. So what advice, because this field is anything but normal, what advice would you give to someone who wants to start building up a little bit more of a life kind of outside of the weight room or outside of campus? Kind of how would they go about doing so? And what is the value of that that you found in your own life?
No, 100%. I think for me, the turning point when I was like, oh, I need to get like a life outside of this job because I started interning when I was 19 years old, like after my freshman year of college. So like I had been in S&C for a decent chunk of time by the time I was even a GA. And I was like so laser focused. And so it was my second year at middle. I was doing football and basketball, full time with both, traveling with basketball everywhere. I traveled with football a little bit that season, and it was my first year doing those two together. And so I was in season. I remember from the beginning of August to the end of March because we made a postseason run that year. We went to the tournament. And I remember getting out of basketball season and I was beyond burnt out. Like I was just like, I'm done. I have nothing left to give anybody because I wanted, still being really early in my career, like I wanted both teams to feel like I was their only strength coach. Like I wanted to show that I deserved this opportunity. And but on the backside of it, like I didn't do a good job of taking care of myself at all. And like in retrospect now I understand like if I don't take care of myself, then I'm not showing up as the best version of myself for my kids regardless. So it's like important. But when I was 24, 23, like I didn't understand that concept. But now like at the ripe old age of 26, it's like settled in.
So
But
old.
right? But I would say like that was the flip for me, where it's like, okay, no, like if you want to be in this field for a long time, then you need to start figuring out some healthier ways to create balance in your life. And I think that balance is relative to you and what your career or like what sports you work with, obviously, and how far you want to take your career. But for me, I was like, okay, I need to find, and I think me and you have talked about this concept before, but like the concept of like a third place. Like
Yeah.
I have to find something outside of going home and going to work because right now the things I do and it's not healthy. So at the time I was broke. So I was like, okay, I just need to start find a hobby that's free. For me, for me, if you know me, my family are like pickleball fiends and they are very, very competitive. And so every time I would go home, I was the weak link because I didn't play year round like they did. So I was like, all right,
Uh-oh. Gotta defend your honor.
yeah, I was like, this is it. So I took up pickleball when I was out in Tennessee, and that became like my hobby. And like honestly, I developed a great community. It was like how I ended up making friends, and like it really helped me put down roots. However, I do feel like in all my stops, like it's always been a different activity. When I was at Illinois State, I took up boxing for the summer. That was fun. And then now that I'm here in Virginia, like taking up pickleball taught me very like I realized how much healthier my mindset and like mental state got. And like when I was having down days, or if I had days where I was really anxious or work was just really stressing me out, like going outside and running around always made me feel better. So when I moved to Virginia, I was like, okay, the first thing I'm gonna do is figure out like what is something I'm gonna like throw myself into outside of work in like my apartment. And so I joined another gym, and like that was huge for me. 'Cause it's like, okay, like I really enjoy training and now I'm gonna be able to train and not be a coach. And like that has done tenfold for my mental state. So what I'm saying here is you may have to try a couple different things. So if you try one and it works for a little while or it fits your schedule for a little while, that's great. Now you know like, hey, when I'm in season, this is a great thing for me or a great hobby that I can do. But when I'm in off season, like I have the time to do this hobby, so I'm gonna do this. And like it may ebb and flow with how your year looks, and it's not always going to look the same. And I think like when it does get really hectic, because like I know for me, once it gets into season, like it's hard to make time for yourself when you're in season, especially if you're a strength coach who has to travel with your team. Pick like the one thing that you know is that pick the one thing that consistently helps ground you and keeps you in a better mental state. So like for me, it was training. So during last year, like I said, last year we went to the tournament too, and we was a long year. Like we played almost until the end of March, which was super fun. But for me, like training kept me grounded, like to the point where sometimes before we would like get on a 5:30 a.m. bus, like I would come in and train at 4 a.m.
Oh man.
because it just like made me feel like I had taken 45 minutes for myself that day before we took off on a full travel day where, I'm at the extent of someone else's schedule and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have control over anything that happens. And so I just have to roll with the flow. But like going into the day knowing, hey, I took my 45 minutes to get a good training session in or get something in that makes me feel like I did something for me made such a difference in my mental health from year 2 to year 3. So be willing to try new things and be willing to change it up to fit your schedule. But if all else fails, pick the one thing that helps you out most consistently, even if it's just for 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think definitely when all of the things outside of the weight room and stuff aren't going that well, then it can kind of bleed into the sessions, or maybe your fuse is a little bit shorter than it usually is, or whatever it may be. But just to have something to look forward to, I think like definitely not when I was into sports betting, but like it's like, oh cool, I have a game to look forward to, or like waking up knowing I was going to play Xbox with my brother later. Or every Tuesday was bowling, just to go back to those examples. But I think on the flip side, it's expectations of like things are going to happen and a coach is going to move a lift from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Not that that's ever happened either, so maybe you have to miss or something kind of like that.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I think it's the intentionality and kind of the relentlessness of like I am going to find something, and even if it's just like a 6 week commitment, and you're like, okay, I don't like that sport. Maybe knitting isn't for me. At least you did something to get you out of the house. Um, so yeah, no, I think that's great, and I found a lot of value myself in doing something that's not related, and even like because I have a Patreon, this podcast, my YouTube channel, it's like that's still related to work, and I think this was a Daily Stoic, maybe podcast, if you're familiar with Ryan Holiday's work. And leisure doesn't necessarily mean easy. I think leisure is just where your brain is like kind of off. So like yard work or bowling or like boxing or where you're just doing things. So if the listener is inspired, look up the definition of leisure and then figure out whatever fits in that for you.
No, I think that's like such a great like point though. It doesn't have to be complex. I think like as strength coaches, like we're such like intense people by nature and we're like 100%. We have to do something so
Everything. Yeah.
like a hobby now. I have to be the best at it. It's like no, it can literally like some days if I know like I'm not gonna have time to go play pickleball or whatever, some days my like thing for myself is okay, after practice and team meal, I'm gonna take a walk and get coffee. And it's like a mile walk. I get some coffee, I'm gonna come back and it's like okay, that's like a nice little reset, got some sunshine, and then I'm gonna come back and do some work. And like I've had days where that is what I'm looking forward to the most. It's just like, okay, 20 minutes to get some coffee, listen to some music, and then I'll rock with the rest of my day. So it does not have to be complex.
Mm.
Don't overthink it in the stereotypical strength coach way.
Yeah. And me in my old age of 28 and you in your medium age of 26, I think you have to be, because in college, there's just so many things to look forward to anyways, kind of just built into the experience, especially as an athlete. So I think as an adult, you got to be more intentional about making those things as simple or complex as they are. Um, so I think that was great. So I would like to say thank you again, roll out the red carpet to shamelessly plug, emphasis on shameless, whatever you got to plug, and where can the listeners get more of Coach Tessa?
Probably just my Instagram, Coach Tessa Grossman, easiest place to find me. My social media game is not phenomenal, but I am on Instagram.
And the next time you're watching any athletic event, look for that pink scrunchie bobbing up and down.
Yes, if you see a colored scrunchie, it's probably me.
Fantastic. So thank you very much again, and we will talk soon.
Thanks for having me.